to when you're in a smaller situation. We call them code reds and code blues. They're operational outages, right? We're very used to jumping on and being involved in operational outages where we're giving management, hey, we think email will be back up in an hour. I know you can't breathe until it's back up, but we'll get you there, right? So again, a lot less control here. Longer duration, again, 18 to 20 months is the average. You'll read in a lot of the documentation from the CDC and the WHO, especially when you factor in the additional waves that tend to come. And then if you happen to line up in a perfect storm and the waves are ending at the same time that maybe a flu season or some other event like that might bring back something like COVID, right? So again, more traditional BCP events, you know the triage, you know the recovery path. It's a much more stable environment for you to return to. So it's much easier for you to say, okay, it's going to take us a week to get this, 10 days to get this. And here's the outage piece. Here's the mitigation we can have. And here's what we can't do. And again, just the traditional piece of BCPs deal with a loss of equipment, resources. Again, even if it's physical space, that's way more controllable in a general sense than scattering people the way we've scattered. Any questions or comments so far? Not hearing any. So, all right. So again, where does pandemic fit? Here's a little timeline we like to show people within our company to kind of get their head around what is a BCP-DR event, right? So you talk about normal operations going on. This first bar is really the event, right? Something bad happened, whatever that bad thing is. You then move into an assessment phase. You then make a decision point of, hey, we need to go into some level of recovery. You do that recovery. You maybe do recovery testing. You extend that testing to the rest of the company, or do full site recovery. And then there's post-recovery operations, right? And that may include everything from rolling back off the test environment, the BCP environment, back onto your full production environment. So we try to give people that view of what that looks like. And so again, the pandemic is a bit different. Oftentimes they start off as an outbreak and then they move to an epidemic and then they move into pandemic mode, right? So these things are coming and you see outbreaks. Outbreaks happen much more frequently. Epidemics, obviously a little less frequently, and then pandemics are, once in a lifetime kind of events, hopefully. And so the 101 of this really, again, is that you're truly trying to plan around people. And there's some key elements to this. One of the things that we have here, and I can share not only the slides, but these documents if you'd care to, if anyone cares to see them or have them. So one of the things that we have done within our company is you have the location, you have the address maybe, or the region, you show update information. Again, this is for compliance and other reasons. And this basically walks you through exactly how to risk rank various things within your environment that you can and can't deal with, right? And one of them is pandemic. We went so far as to even understanding the chemical and petroleum facilities and how close they are to us, whether or not we have a shared space. Maybe we're sharing a building with 3 other companies. What do those companies do? Do they have special political affiliations or other things that might cause disruption through us? But once you get done grading this and you go through the likelihood and the impact and you get a final risk ranking, you flip that over to the graph. And if you see item number 20, which was pandemic, is really down in the make do area, right? Not very likely, although it has a lot of potential of doing something bad. And you could argue that this could be put in different places, but this is one of the tools that we use to try and give an overall risk ranking of the pandemic compared to other things, right? And that way you're putting it in context as you go build out a plan. The next item was within our business impact assessment template. So one of the things that we did is we drove the planning and the details of the recovery based on business impact from the business unit. And so part of that was very much a way to identify, again, very early on, you want to talk about who are the people, who's in charge, who are the decision makers. We talk about assumptions. Departments will maintain a list of operational, technical, and strategic needs. And those strategic needs, by definition for us, if I can scroll fast enough, was really about equipment, information, forms, special things, or skills, right? Who is the POC for that? Do we have one person in the company who has access to a particular function? As an example, we had some certificates of insurance that were written out in a very special legal way, and only one legal person in the company I worked at prior to this company was allowed to do anything with them. And so it's like, all right, well, where are those sitting? Well, they're sitting on a shelf behind me, right? So understanding those skill sets and things like that. And then we went even so far as to say, even within our evacuation plan, and you don't necessarily need to know the medical details, right? There's HIPAA issues there, but I may need to know some basic information about if I need to evacuate, right? Or if I have people working from home that have certain medical conditions, you know, is that something that we need to factor into our plans in a way that helps us, helps them, and or at least makes us understand that that's a potential issue, right? So that covers that. And then one of the other questions is, what does it look like for you to have a skeleton crew, right? What does pandemic office space look like for you? Can you reduce staff down to 25%? Can you reduce to 20? Can you get down to less than 5? You know, really, what does that look like for you? And trying to know that earlier on. Obviously, again, we're past a bit of this, but it's good to kind of talk through that. So pandemic planning, right? So it's in some ways it's no different than other BCBDR type events. It's designed to minimize disruption. It's designed to anticipate potential business disruptions. Oh, I did that twice. You try to anticipate the toll on employees, and in this case, families, right? Again, we're not only dealing with the employee. This isn't an issue where the employee can't get to the office because there's some problem at the office. This employee is now often doing something where they're working in one space, their spouse or significant other is working in 10 feet away, and they've got 3 kids in the room who are also trying to get work done. So it's just a very different dynamic, right? A high level of absenteeism, right? Part of pandemic planning says that you should plan for at least 30% absenteeism, right, at a minimum. So again, going back to if I can handle 25% of the people in the office, then I know I can meet that absenteeism control, right? And this could be due to sickness. This could be due to other things. Again, if you have children at home, we right now have some people who are saying, I would really love to get back in the office. We have other people saying, I'm not sure when I'll ever be able to get back in the office. I don't know what's going on with school, right? Again, these are things that our company does not have the ability to control and make decisions on. So we have to wait on others to make those decisions and free up resources. So how do we manage with that employee? A low level of remediation on the initial event, right? Pandemics are things that you don't control, and you're basically just waiting for the waves of things to go through. And that's because there's not medical information, there's not a medical responsibility. A lot of this is just trying to control overwhelming certain systems and functionality within society or within communities of the main society. So there's a lot of moving parts there, right? Susceptibility is universal. Right? Again, this is not something that happened to a department. It's not something that happened in our Texas office. This happened to everyone all at the same time, including our vendors, right? Do you now have a third-party vendor that can't meet a critical business line, right? Part of that is something that should be spelled out from that department, and that department saying, this is a critical business third party for me, right? And then there's a discussion potentially around your third-party risk and having a conversation with them around, well, what's your plan? Like, can you handle 30% absenteeism, right? Maybe it's just a set of high-level questions to gain a basic understanding of the risk with them. Maybe you can develop a fallback, maybe you can't. But again, it's just understanding that the susceptibility from pandemic is universal, and there's a way to sort of plan for that, to be able to ask questions and get an idea and get your hands around some of the general risk issues, but also just understanding that you're not going to have all the answers, right? Management should not assume, should very clearly, definitely not assume that we're going to have all of this canned up and totally controlled. Again, because the susceptibility is universal, you have federal agencies and guidelines that may totally impact what you're doing. Like us, you may have offices in different locations, right? And so you have a Texas office that is allowed to do one thing, and a Louisiana office that's not, and a California office that's doing something entirely different. You may have folks overseas who are basically back to work as normal, right? And they're ready to keep things going and keep things moving. So again, lots of shifting priorities and control elements that create, fast lanes and slow lanes. We talked about third parties, it can't be guaranteed. And then pandemic planning is really about creating trigger points along the way, decision points, if you will, right? So 4 key elements of that, documenting an overall strategy with the framework, establishing prevention program to reduce the likelihood of significant impact, identifying and exercising that plan, and then establishing, and maybe it doesn't go to the pandemic level, but maybe you plan on having one where it involves an outbreak, or it involves a high flu issue, next flu season, right? And just so that people can walk through and understand, if all of a sudden I have 5 managers out and I have a process that goes through and they get emailed an approval process, and that approval process is sitting in 3 different people's inboxes, but all 3 of those people are out. How do we get past those processes if that's on our critical path, right? And then establishing oversight so that you're doing a review and update along the way, right? There's this idea of lessons learned, and when you hear something and you find something, you find a rubbing point that someone is taking notes on that, right? So that we can go back and either address that later, or again, it may be something that can't be addressed. It just has to be something that's understood. So a big way that we did this, and I would say if you haven't done this, this is probably one of the big takeaways that you could probably go and do. We broke people down into 4 categories. And realizing that this information could become very sensitive, right? This is an HR legal, maybe sensitive document. When you start talking about people that are not critical and may not be required for work, in other words, people that you may have to lay off, this can become very sensitive, at the least sensitive to the people involved in that portion of the list, right? So we talked about who's critical and who's non-critical, but then we very quickly broke that down to who's required to be in the office, right? There are certain functions within our business that have to be on site. They just have to be. There's no way around them. We've done some creative things in some locations where that wasn't allowed, where we were able to reroute. As an example, there's certain mail that comes into the office that has to be processed a certain way. There's a timetable that stuff has to be processed on, either because there's a state requirement or a vendor or a customer requirement. Oftentimes that involves money or other things. And so there's this idea that you've got to be in that space to do that. And where we couldn't do that, you reroute that mail, right? So we were able to do that in some locations. Then you have the people that can work from home. You have the non-critical people, but they can also work from home, right? So if you can fit everybody into that, who's not in category 1 or 2 into category 3, you might be covered, right? Because that also takes relief off of the people in category 1 and 2, because they're now not doing just the critical stuff, but some of the extra, more mundane day-to-day stuff. And then you really have to ask, is that day-to-day mundane thing really needed? Again, early on in our company, when we went to the finance department, we expected this massive list of things that they were going to want to restore and bring back up. And when we really put the details of what we were looking to them in our overall plan, we said, bare bones, absolutely bare bones, what could you deal with? And they said, well, if I had Excel and I had access to the internet, I could write a ledger and totally manage the money. And it was like, oh, we had like all these other financial pieces that we thought. And it's like, no, if I can move money in and out of accounts through access on the internet and I can ledger them in some way, we're done. And so it became a real easy process for finance for quite a while until other things developed, right? So again, understanding whether or not that non-critical thing really is non-critical, but whether it may still be needed, right? So tiering those things out. And again, so we broke people down and we gave them categories, executive people that are making decisions, primary BCP, alternate BCP, BCP team members. Again, you can read through this, whether someone is a remote user or a support person. We also break people down whether or not they're part of a BCP or maybe a DR team, right? Again, if you lose a facility, some of your people are gonna have to keep on working and some people may have to go help figure out this is gonna be the new office, right? And you may need input from people who aren't just management or aren't just facilities. You may want managers or employees walking into that space and understanding what that space is gonna look like to make that migration. So this is really where I was trying to get to. I think in our last conversation, I spent a lot more time around the BCP aspect of that, and we can certainly talk about those pieces. But this is really where we're all at, right? So phase 6, and then beyond phase 6, what does that look like? So a need for continued monitoring and mitigation, right? Having a plan, being able to communicate that plan, even if that plan is we're going to wait until after something, right? For management to say, we don't know when we're going back because the governor hasn't told us, really doesn't make employees feel good. So if the answer is, we're going to evaluate this after Labor Day, we're going to evaluate this after September 15th, we're going to evaluate this out, then people have an idea of getting to a goal. You know, it's sort of the Disney World wait in line method. You know, in Disney World, you're going through these big massive lines, you get around the corner and all of a sudden there's a whole nother 20 feet of line you didn't know was there, right? So people don't mind doing that because they think they're just around the corner to the next thing. And then you can bite pieces off in smaller pieces rather than saying, we just have no idea, right? And you have to be careful of that, because if part of that brain trust at your company with that special skill set begins to think, we don't know what's going on and this is not a stable place, I may go look someplace else, right? Gating factors to moving back in the office. Again, just as you're supposed to have gating factors to decide to move out, in many ways, there's gating factors to move back in, but also to pause the move back in and even retreat from the move back in, right? So, you know, pandemics are well known to have second and third waves. They look different in different areas. We'll pull up some epidemiology charts here near the end if we have time, and you all care to look at that kind of stuff. So understanding that, again, people start to get excited. We've got people right now that are already excited to get back, but that may move forward to a point. We may then stop for a while. We may roll it back, right? We have to be flexible to what that's going to look like. Communicating these plans. This includes more than things like call trees. There are notification systems out there, using the web, using email, voice, mobile, SMS, conferencing calls, conferencing systems, shipping equipment to employees' houses. As an example, one of the things that we did is we said, hey, we're not sure. Our initial response was, we're not sure when we're coming back. We very quickly turned that around and said, you know what, we're going to look at after Labor Day. So if you need to go in the office and get a monitor or a keyboard or a mouse or a chair because you're sitting at a kitchen table and that's terrible, then take that stuff home. And then we had, you know, our facilities people came through and kind of calculated everything that was taken home to track it, and we moved on from there. But all that became part of the communication. When you do begin the return process, what is your screening process? Are there requirements? Are there county level requirements? Some places are doing that. Most places are trying to push it to the state level. I think Florida may be the only one that's still really much at a county level in many ways. But the screening process that you have, are you meeting federal requirements? Has legal sort of signed off on that and they're okay with the process that you're using? Are we not violating HIPAA in any way? Things like that. And then contact triage plan, right? So if you do end up having an outbreak, and that may be what causes a pause or retreat, right? It may not be something larger in the community. It may be specific to you and your company. You're seeing this at some of the colleges and things like that going on right now. Employee recovery categories, we talked about that up above, you know, understanding what those are, people understanding what categories they fit in a large way, but also, again, a succession plan. And that's more about the senior staff and senior elements of the company. You know, you hear some big name people that maybe got sick, and you hear about a couple people that unfortunately passed away. What would that look like if that happened at our company, right? So the succession planning should be actually way outside of just this, but it should be an element of what maybe is understood and brushed off and looked at. The need for office access, you know, equipment that needs to be returned and sanitized, right? So you got people that want to come back in. We have people that maybe need to come back in. What does that look like? Who is that? Again, what are the conditions that we're going to put on that? As people return and we're going to go to sanitize that equipment or bring that equipment back in, what does that look like? Do we stage an area down away from the rest of the company? Do we have a dock area that we can bring things in, clean things up? What does that, you know, how does that look? Again, the desire for office access. So you've got people that are saying, I can't wait to get back in. And you have other people that are saying, I have no idea when I'm going to be able to come back in. It's just, it's not going to work for me until lots of other things within the community also get restored. Encourage people to still take vacation time. This is something that we focused on a little bit late, I think. Even if they don't go anywhere, disconnecting from work. You know, oftentimes, maybe some of you guys have felt that too. I know that when I'm sitting at home and I'm working and then I go inside and that's 10 feet away, it's a lot harder to disconnect and to feel like you finished work and now you're home and home is not work, right? If that's actually at your kitchen table every night, then that can be even more dramatic, right? So encouraging people to take that time if they can. It needs to be a phased approach. A test location would be good if you can do that. We have a plan right now ourselves where we're going to open the office back up at one location and only for a very small set of people. And you'll see how some of that breaks down, including it will continue to include social distancing, limited access, how will office meetings be handled and things like that. New and improved cleaning process. Again, are you cleaning high touch areas? What's the current guidance from the CDC or the WHO on cleaning processes? Those are all out there. So if you're looking for that kind of stuff, there's companies out there willing to charge you 10 grand and officially certify your stuff is clean. Do you need to go through that process or not? Gathering lessons learned again along the way and adapting on the fly if you can. Making micro changes if you can. Team separations, all right? So bringing teams in by function, by physical area, but also by time, right? We know that with this particular issue, time is a factor. How long people are spending with each other creates the potential for worst case scenarios. The more time spent with an office space empty, the virus dies off and you have less issues, right? So as an example, what might be good is, you have a team red and a team blue. Team red comes in for the first week. You then have the weekend or maybe a long weekend. Maybe it's a 4-day work week in the office and 1 day out of the office. And then you give a good amount of time, 2 or 3 days, to allow that space, not just for the cleaning, but for sanitation to really take effect, to clean up. Distributing your workloads, distributing those locations. Do we need, we don't want everyone in the office from one location. We don't want everyone in the office from one floor or one section of a floor or one department. How can we slice this apart and make this more modular? We've had conversations early on. We had manager like, well, I'm going to bring in team 1 on even days and team 2 on odd days. And it was like, whoa, that's really not a good idea. Again, you're seeing some of this in the colleges where, you could have 7 out of 8 people doing the right thing. And if that one person decides they're okay and they don't have an issue, they feel safe, they feel fine, you have the potential of that person bringing things back in. So rotating people on a short basis like that is not really recommended. Again, I want to stop here for a minute and make sure there isn't any questions, comments. Are you all doing this already? And this is old hat to you.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jim, that the way you're going through that certainly is characteristic of the job that you do in planning things out. And I had the occasion to make a presentation to the Better Business Bureau a couple of weeks ago, and address that particular point of what do you do as you bring the people back in. And one of the things I focused on was, well, you're talking about cleaning the equipment from the standpoint of the virus, but what about cleaning the equipment for other viruses, for malware that might be in, because it's been sitting in a home network that's unsecured. How are you dealing with that?
We're dealing with that in that, so again, part of our plan very early on years ago, we moved away from desktops. We moved everyone to laptops. Everyone had an RSA token. You can only connect to when you bring your laptop home or you're out of our office, not on our wired network, when the wireless network is turned on, we control that. You can only access the internet via our VPN. And then you only come back through to us. So all of your traffic is leaving your home network through an encrypted tunnel back to us. Part of that includes when you connect to us, we actually dump you into a cordoned off area of our VPN. It actually does a check to make sure you've got the latest antivirus and patches and things like that. It pushes those. If you don't, you may even have to do a reboot. Usually not. People have gotten really good. Early on, there was a lot of complaints about how this process worked, but once people figured out, when we tell you to reboot regularly, that really does help you, because we're pushing out patches, we're pushing out other things that are really there to make your system continue to work well. So you need to play along, right? This isn't us versus you. This is us fixing things, making things better so that you can keep doing your job. So that's largely how we've been able to deal with that. And that's also why we were able to go, when our company made the final decision to move, we had 450 people leave the office on Friday and all began work from home on Monday. the following Monday without a hitch. So,
what advice would you give to the companies that aren't at the same level you are?
You got to piecemeal. I mean, this came over time. You know, if some of this helps you get a big leg up, great. One of the things that we continue to leverage is when you have events like this and you can drive home a security or a technology advancement like this. If we had this thing, it would have fixed this before. You tend to get the buy-in you need in the moment. Don't try and boil the ocean. Try and fix the big thing that maybe can get you to the next step. And then again, it's a process. Break this down. Take what you can get out of it. Use what you can get. Make the business case. I think a lot of security people are really good at talking security. They're not good at talking business. So what we did is we learned to talk to our finance department, our senior staff, our marketing department, HR. We learned to talk to them in the context of their job and what the risk was to them. Right? They understood the risk better. They don't understand, you know, if I'm going to do a denial of service attack against you and I'm going to do an SQL engine, all that just goes right over their head and they don't think about it. So we tried very hard to sell this from the perspective of what it would do for them.
Hey, Jim, one of the things that I'm wondering if you've noticed this, or if this is something that this is not something I really anticipated, is a lot of organizations are looking to, hey, can we continue to operate remotely? Yeah. One of the things I've noticed is it seems like users who are remote, or users who realize they're staying remote for a long period of time, they're getting more creative about how they do their jobs. Yeah. And that's not such a good thing, right? I can't get into exact details on what I'm seeing professionally, but things like unsanctioned SaaS, things like sending corporate data out and thinking that that's acceptable because I'm at home. And again, I'm surrounded by people that have so much more experience than me, but I'm finding that was something that I really didn't anticipate through all the business continuity planning. Yeah. Really didn't anticipate that. And I'm finding that there are some solutions that I really didn't realize we had a problem for in the past that we're reaching for, because people are getting very creative. They're and almost with disregard to policy, because gosh, I'm remote and I need to fix this problem and I need to come up with this way of doing my job. So a lot of that's training, and some of that is, you know, giving them the right tools to do their job properly. Yes,
I'm not sure. Is there a question specific? Or
I guess comment? I'm wondering, are you seeing that as well?
Oh yeah, you see that. We have departments that have gone off and thought, you know, not even departments. You get an individual employee who says it's $20 a year to pay for this little service, and it's going to help me make things go faster. I'm going to go use it. So that's where you go back to hopefully some of your other controls. We in particular happen to have a CASB that looks for over 30,000 different SaaS application connections. We're actually going through a process right now where we're weeding through those applications. Who's accessing what? Is that business related? One of the things that we stumbled across that you also may not have thought of is, are you accessing something that the licensing says you can't access that for a commercial purpose? Right? So you're using it, it's giving you access to potential clients, or it's giving you access to something that we've got really smart people that are like, yeah, I can log into this site. I can then run a script to download this information, dump that into our tables. We'll get new risk information on this region of the country. It's like, wait a second, that site specifically says you can't use it for that purpose. Right? So there's, no one has done the legal review of the document. No one has done a subscription review of what the cost is and those kinds of things. So yeah, you try and get in front of those with some of hopefully with your other controls. Education is part of that, literally going to teams and going, why did you think you could just go do this on your own? Right? We have a process. We have a third-party risk management process where we look at every company every year, right? And every company is risk ranked every year. I got 3 people on my staff that deal with third-party risk management on a regular basis. We ourselves get audited more than 300 times a year, right? That's more than one per business day. So yeah, you've got these other controls in place that you would use. Ideally, you have those conversations. And then, like what you said, is you try and give people that access to what they need. Some of it we have found has actually been good, right? So we have people that say, hey, I really can't get on now at 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't mind getting on at 10 and staying on later. And for us, in many ways, that's doable. So part of it is to maybe also break managers out of that 9 to 5 mentality in some ways. So there's ways that can be beneficial. But yeah, you got to try and get in front of people doing the crazy stuff, and they're going to do it. And oftentimes they're just trying to get their job done. That's another thing we've tried to do culturally is if you're just trying to get your job done, usually, digital forensic wise, I can tell whether you were trying to do something bad or not. Like I have a pretty good ability to figure out what you were doing and how you were doing it. So if you were just trying to do your job and now you realize, oh, maybe I didn't do something I should have and I didn't go through some process, backing up and putting your hand up is entirely okay. And we get that. And that's a good way of learning too. Sometimes you have no idea something's going on and someone goes, hey, we're using this tool and we paid for it through Joe's credit card. Is that okay? It's like, no, that's not okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Why would you do that?
And this is Evelyn. Jim and I had the conversation about, a lot of these tools were in place a long time ago. I worked for a company that we had 300 people all working from home, and this was back in 2007, so 13 years ago. Yeah. And as soon as we stepped a toe out of line, we got a phone call. I worked for all developers, so they developed something called IMON internally that watched our every move. We could not do anything without them. They were tracking our everything. So there's ways to do it, but they were also writing us up or so they had us under lock and key, total control.
Yeah, as an example, we've done, and this kind of goes back to some of the stuff that Jeff was talking about, is that our phishing campaigns that we do heavily focused on something that might happen within COVID, right? HR is going to send everyone a company branded face mask. Click, lots of clicks, right? So we'd really try to focus on what would the bad guys actually try to do to get you to click on something. What would HR do? One of the other ones we ran was HR has made changes to the PTO policy for the year, and there's more restrictions or there's more freedom, right? Again, what gets people to click either out of fear or out of reward? So, I'm going to get more vacation time. I want to click on that, right? And then catching them through that, going, guys, there's some obvious things, and there's always obvious things. We always have a minimum of 5 flags on our stuff. We make it obvious. It should be fairly obvious that you're going to be clicking on something that you probably shouldn't. And when you fail, it's like, here, right? All right, no more questions for now? Get back to, so this really got into, there's fiscal challenges, costs that weren't expected, lost revenue and reimbursements that may have to happen. Reimbursements you may get, right, through different vendors. New income sources, again, people can get very creative, and now because someone was forced into a new paradigm, they now have a new way of thinking about the product. They have a new way of thinking about delivery. They have a new way of thinking about connecting to a new income base, things like that. Layoffs and family leave, right? Those kinds of things. Workers' compensation. Things that might come out of that from the perspective of returning to work. Someone gets sick and now they're back out of the office. Psychological and emotional things. There's lots of people talking about this today. Addressing concerns for continued psychological, emotional support. Again, this is a long-term thing that affects people over time, and it affects people differently. I would equate, sort of what we're going through. If you've ever been through a live shooter incident or know anybody that has, those can have a different kind of psychological effect than just, hey, the Exchange servers became corrupt and we had to rebuild them and it took 4 days. And man, that really sucked that we didn't have email. Counseling and mental health services, do you have them? Do you provide them? Are you notifying people? Is that people are staying aware of that? Did anyone request but not get these services? Right? There should be an HR function monitoring and looking at this kind of stuff. Someone requesting, or even within a team, asking your manager, hey, I'm not, I'm having problems. Managers boiling that stuff up. Managers having conversations with HR about what are our services, right? I know within our particular service, they waived the copays for all mental health visits for a certain period of time. We may have had people that wouldn't have bothered going had we not announced that. They did go because it was a waiver and they felt they could use that, right? But did someone request something that didn't get the services that they felt they need? Do you have someone feeling disgruntled? And that may come back in various ways, right? Someone could just leave. Someone could do something malicious within the system. They could steal corporate information. They could, do something worse, right? So trying to consider those things. Again, managers, when I get on calls like this, I love when people get on, especially on my team. We really try to make sure at least a few times a week, I'm seeing your face. I'm seeing that you're okay. We're having conversations. You're not totally disheveled and looking a little crazy. There's a bunch of sites here, a bunch of stuff around how it's spreading, cleaning processes. There's FS-ISAC, that's a member. You may have a separate ISAC that you're dealing with. Lots of resources around the WHO and the CDC. Local and national news media, you've got to find the ones that really work. There is a national governor's site that's really good, especially if your company is countrywide and you're trying to figure out what's going on in California versus what's going on here. The national governor's website has really good, succinct information at the state level. Staying in front of that and making sure you understand when things are changing can be key. Right now, it's pretty straightforward, but again, that's part of that monitoring process to make sure if something is rolled back and you've allowed people to go back in the office, are you allowed to do that? Do you need to slow that down? Do you need to change that process? So this is some EpiCharts and just looking at different things. This is from today. The 5.6 and the 1.6, those are all relative numbers that really talk to the number of new cases created out of 100,000 people in that area over a 7-day period. And that sort of gives you a bake-in. I think Europe is actually using a 10-day bake-in. It kind of gives you an idea of how the infection rate is rolling through a particular area over a time span based on a certain size, right? You couldn't say Spain and Germany or the US because we have different populations, different things like that. So you really need to break it down at a more succinct level. So if you look at the one from France, by the way, the CDC has sites you can go to, and they've got these training courses that can go through and kind of teach you how to look at an EpiChart and what the different things mean. What you see going on in France and sort of in Germany and Spain was this looks very much like a phase 1, wave 2 kind of thing going on. Aruba is pretty much brand new. It's hard to see, but they really didn't get their first infections until August. Theirs is sort of a mini version of the US one. If you really look at that, it sort of went up and plateaued and then went up again. The US fell into that same category. Peru has had something a little bit different, again, pretty high, but it's still, again, kind of similar to what the US has gone through. And these are just charts to kind of get into, again, what does it look like in a given area? How are things breaking down? This particular site you can go to and use actually breaks it down by state. So you can look at North Carolina, you can look down to the county level. It's all data being fed from the CDC. All that being said, none of this data is like 24 hours old, right? All of this data is usually several days old. When we rotated off of the CDC to HHS and back, that's also caused a little bit of a bump in the data. So you'll see the data fluctuate kind of weird in some cases. That's why you see some weird spikes sometimes, and that the data finally got inputted, and so it was kind of figured out from there. Again, this is just extra stuff from BCBDR planning, the who, the what, the where, the why. So I'll throw this in. This gets into the absenteeism, what you really need to kind of look for, and the difference between phase 1 through 3 versus phases 4 through 6. What these phases look like, why you may be going through a particular phase now, and that's it. I'm not sure what my timeline is or whether I'm over or short, but.
That was perfect timing. Just a quick question. I know you said that this obviously can be used to work with your teams, to work, make announcements to employees across the board, and the executives. I know you mentioned that, coming in and doing a deep clean that's like $10,000, $15,000 or whatever. Are there any are any of the costs, are you working with like the financial groups to kind of go over what the financial impact might be if, you know, everybody comes back in, or just unexpected things that were to come?
Yeah, so part of that is so worst case scenario there. And I guess if the easiest thing for us to do was to plan out worst case, and then it was fairly easy to kind of back off and go, well, if that didn't happen, but this happened. And if that didn't happen, you know, what could we remove? And some of that might be items you could actually monetize and say that would cost X, and now we wouldn't pay for that if we're one level removed from that, right? So part of that is really planning, you know, when you're planning your comeback, part of planning that comeback is to even just avoid it. If you know, I have a second company that I act as the director for security in, and they are very much in a position where they don't need to come back anytime soon. So the answer is, why would you bother coming back? Why would you bother risking employees when you can simply wait 3 or 4 more months, if that's what it takes, to bring people back in and not have to worry about a $15,000 cleaning bill, right? If you can wait it out, why not wait it out? So part of really deciding to get back is, again, understanding that stuff. It's planning for it, worst case scenario, but then, you know, whether you can do it or not, right? So pricing things out. I know several people that I've talked to had problems even getting hold of RSA tokens, right? You got 500 employees, but you only got 200 people on RSA. I got to get laptops. I got to get, you know, all this other equipment, things like that. You know, there's lots of ways of slicing and dicing that, and using third-party services to connect from home PCs, but also creating, you know, distancing. All of that has cost. All of it has to be evaluated. It's all doable, but what we did is we started off by asking worst case scenario and then sort of backing off from there. And that's why we're going back, you know, one place and one state at one office on one floor, and we'll start with that. We'll learn from that, because we can always add people, right? And we can always pull people back off. But if we throw everyone back in and we're not really managing it, and we don't know what's going on, and you can't measure and sort of understand what's happening and how you got to a certain situation, you can't figure out root cause, then you're just shooting in the dark, and that your costs go crazy, your controls go crazy.
No, that makes perfect sense. I can see this bringing, you know, a lot of peace in a chaotic time, just to have a good plan like this in place. Any questions, anybody else?
Yeah, I was curious, Jim. You mentioned the flexibility for employees and their schedules. Have you had any situations where you've had parents or people who were otherwise responsible for school-age children looking to shift their schedule so that during the hours that their kids had to be online for school, they were kind of off, but then after their kids got their schoolwork finished, then they came back on the clock and did their work for the company?
Yeah, so there's a couple elements of that. Yes, we did. It wasn't as dramatic as having to be off the entire school day. For us, it's mostly, I need to get, you know, Johnny up and running and get him pointed in the right direction. Then by 9:30 or 10 o'clock, I can probably really start focusing back on my stuff. Part of that for us is, again, understanding workflow and what people should be doing. This, again, kind of maybe speaks back a little bit to Jeff's stuff. You know, managers should really hopefully understand what someone's workload looks like, right? And what their tasks are and how quickly they can usually get something done. I have a particular guy on my team. He handles most of our scans and our scan remediation. I know that when we have a critical issue or a high ranking vulnerability, it takes him, you know, 24 hours to really get the details, get it to the right people, decide what the fix is, you know, and get things turned around and done. I understand that, right? And if that were to suddenly stop happening, that can begin with an internal conversation. Again, HR having conversations with managers around what do those controls look like? When should I start talking to an employee? When should I go beyond talking to the employee, right? Again, we can measure different things like that and kind of track that. The other thing is we're nationwide, and so we have some people that don't come in until California time. And maybe the answer for us was, I know you're on the East Coast, but for work, we're going to put you on West Coast time, right? Or we're going to put you on, Chicago time or whatever we needed to help adjust them. And that's communication on their part to us going, I'm having a problem and I don't think I'm gonna get fired over it. And us working with them and trying to figure out, well, what works for both of us. And it's been really interesting. We actually, senior management is even talking in some sense around, do we need all of the floor space we have? Do we really need to ever go back to a 5-floor building? Or maybe there's again, remember I went back to talking about fiscal issues. Maybe there's a cost savings that eventually comes out of this because I do have a subset of people or a particular team that's maybe very easy to measure their workloads and their productivity. And that kind of group can maybe move to a different paradigm. And that opens up to all kinds of things. It opens you up to talent that's maybe not in the area or who's not willing to move to the area, right? It opens you up to different schedules, potentially different customer bases, because you're able to think much more dynamically and much more diversely than Winston or East Coast or North Carolina.
Thank you.
Sure. Good questions. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Were you going to go back to the survey?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Where did my results go? Give me a second to figure out what happened.
I wonder, if they email them to you? Jeff might actually know. I think we did a Survey Monkey recently.
I think I just need to sign back in. Oh, here we go. All right. So I hope you get information out of this. Couple yeses, couple no's, couple not sure's. That's fine. So it's sort of down the middle. Would you say the pandemic has adversely affected the way your employees perform their work? Wow, split sort of right down the middle. That's interesting. That's interesting. Again, that really plays into the type of work that you do, right? If you're in manufacturing, if you're, what kind of work does your company do? Do you have a pandemic plan prior to the current pandemic event? Oh, wow, okay. It's more than I thought. A lot of the conversations I have like this, people had no plan at all. When we show them some of our stuff, we didn't think about that at all. So it's been interesting in some of the conversations. Have you restricted work in the office and yeah, you had to, right? So in many ways you've had to. Whoever said no probably just has a large group of people that are work from home. That are a large group of like critical infrastructure people is how you can flag yourselves. So probably didn't have to make that migration, which is good, or couldn't make the migration based on that. Have you determined criteria for a full return to work? Good, that's excellent. Yeah, and what that looks like. The big thing there again is communicating that, and everyone understanding whether or not that, there may be, again, we may move forward, we may pause, we may roll back. Hopefully not. We want it all to go the best, but we have to be flexible. And that was it. Cool. Excellent.
That's awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, I just want to thank you again, Jim, for doing this. And it's so interesting how the presentation is a little different at this time. And I'm sure if you would have given that survey months ago, the answers would have been different. So it's good to see some of the green creeping up on the other side. And the blues going down. This has been recorded. I started a little bit late, but I didn't want to record all the, meeting business and stuff like that, but we got a majority of it. So we will put this on the YouTube channel. And please don't forget to go and subscribe there, LinkedIn, Twitter. That would be great to have some additional followers there. And if you have any questions afterwards, let us know. I know how to get in touch with Jim. You know, we can filter some questions over to him. And with that, I wish everybody a good night. Did anybody else have any? Jeff, Andrew, Diane, did you have anything before we hop off here?
No, everything was good.
Awesome. Okay, so we will have another meeting next month. We'll put out some, actually have the information we'll send out for that. And we'll talk to everyone soon. Everyone take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.